It started in the middle of a quiet math class on a Wednesday morning. Mr. Darnell, a teacher known for being a little sarcastic, was moving through the usual lesson. He had taught 8th grade math for over 10 years, and most students had learned to laugh off his little comments or ignore them completely. But that day, something different happened. Sitting in the second row was a student named Jalen Brooks. He was quiet, always on time, always watching. Not the kind of student that drew attention to himself. He did his work, stayed out of trouble, and never made a scene. Most of his classmates barely noticed him unless they were paired up in group work. Jalen wasn't failing, but he wasn't at the top either. His grades were average, maybe a little above. He kept to himself, didn't talk much in class, and never argued with teachers. So when Mr. Darnell stopped at his desk and made a comment, no one expected what was coming next. "Well, Jalen," the teacher said, glancing at the worksheet in his hand, "if you're so quiet because you've already mastered this, maybe you're ready for 10th grade math." The class chuckled. It sounded like a joke, just one of those throwaway lines teachers use to lighten the mood. No one took it seriously, except Jalen. He looked up slowly. He didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He just said, "All right, put it on the board." Mr. Darnell raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Put the 10th grade problem on the board," Jalen said calmly. "I'll solve it." The room went silent. A few students laughed nervously. Someone whispered, "He's serious?" But Jalen didn't back down. He looked right at the teacher and waited. Now Mr. Darnell was in a tough spot. He had made a joke, and the student had called him on it. He could have laughed it off and moved on, but something about Jalen's calm, steady tone made him pause. He tapped his marker against the whiteboard for a second, then turned and started writing. In a few seconds, a complex problem filled the space at the front of the class. It wasn't something they had learned yet. It was full of variables, exponents, and parentheses that none of them recognized. It looked like it belonged in a high school textbook. "There," Mr. Darnell said. "Give it a shot." Jalen stood up without a word and walked to the board. He didn't ask any questions. He didn't hesitate. He picked up the dry erase marker, studied the equation for a few seconds, and then got to work. The class was still. Eyes were locked on the board. No one expected him to even try, let alone solve it. But Jalen's hand moved across the board with total control. Line by line, he worked through the steps. He factored parts of the equation. He simplified expressions. He showed his reasoning clearly. It wasn't rushed, but it wasn't slow either. Every move was sharp and confident. Mr. Darnell walked closer, his arms crossed. His face gave nothing away. He watched silently, checking every step in his head. When Jalen finished, he capped the marker, stepped back, and turned to the teacher. "I'm done," he said. Mr. Darnell stared at the board for a long moment. The problem was solved, correctly. Every line made sense. Every answer checked out. He looked back at Jalen. "You've done this before?" Jalen shrugged. "I study online sometimes. I like math." The silence broke. The class burst into whispers. Some were impressed. Others were just confused. But no one was laughing anymore. When the bell rang, students walked out of the room still buzzing. Someone muttered, "That was crazy," as they passed Jalen. But he just picked up his things and walked out like it was nothing. Mr. Darnell stayed behind. He kept glancing at the board, still in disbelief. He had written that problem to stump anyone below 10th grade, and the quiet kid who barely raised his hand just solved it in front of the whole class. That night, Mr. Darnell replayed the moment over and over. It wasn't just the answer. It was the way Jalen approached it, with calm focus, like he had nothing to prove. The next morning, he called Jalen aside before class. "You ever think about joining a math club?" he asked. Jalen shook his head. "There's not one here." "There might be soon," Mr. Darnell said. "And you'd be the first person I ask." Jalen didn't say much, but that small nod meant everything. By lunch, the whole grade had heard about it. Some students were skeptical. Some didn't believe it really happened. Others were asking Jalen how he learned math like that. But he kept things simple. "I just practice," he told them. That Friday, Mr. Darnell tried something new. At the end of class, he put a problem on the board and said, "This one's optional. Solve it over the weekend if you want." The next Monday, 2 students came in with answers. By the following week, 4 more joined in. A quiet competition had started, and every time, Jalen's answer was the cleanest, the clearest, and the fastest. It got to a point where students began staying after school just to learn from him, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. Then came the day when the school counselor, Ms. Parker, pulled Jalen out of class for a quick meeting. "You've been doing really well," she said. "The staff's been talking about it. How would you feel about advanced placement?" Jalen blinked. "For math?" "For math, and maybe more," she said. "We can talk about options." That conversation led to a full review of his academic record. Within 2 weeks, Jalen was placed in a fast-track program. He was given materials from the next level up and assigned a mentor from the high school math department. And all of it started with one challenge. One moment that wasn't even meant to be serious. What surprised everyone wasn't just how smart Jalen was. It was the way he stayed humble. He never acted like he was better than anyone else. He helped classmates who asked questions. He gave quiet tips during study time. He never made fun of anyone for not understanding something. Mr. Darnell saw it too. And one day, after class, he called Jalen over. "I want to say something," he said. Jalen stood quietly. "I made a joke that wasn't really fair, and you turned it into something real. That says a lot." Jalen nodded. "Thanks." "Don't stop," the teacher said. "Keep going. You're going places." And he was right. But that was just the start. By the time Jalen started receiving high school-level materials, something had shifted in the entire school. Other teachers started noticing him. His English teacher, Ms. Keller, commented on how he had started writing deeper reflections in his essays. His science teacher, Mr. Blake, said he asked sharper questions in class. But none of it seemed to change who Jalen was. He was still the same quiet, calm student who walked through the halls with his backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds in, hoodie up. Still the same kid who waited patiently in the lunch line, who nodded when spoken to but rarely started a conversation himself. And yet, every week, someone new was talking about him. One day in early spring, the principal, Mr. Leary, visited Jalen's math class. That didn't usually happen. Most students just froze when the principal walked in. But that day, Mr. Leary sat in the back and watched the lesson unfold. At the end of the class, as the bell rang and students gathered their things, Mr. Leary asked Jalen to stay behind for a moment. "Jalen," he said, "mind if I talk to you for a bit?" Jalen nodded and followed him into the hallway. They walked quietly down to the front office and into a small conference room. The principal pulled out a chair and smiled. "I've heard about what you've been doing in math," he said, "and in other classes too." Jalen sat down. "I've just been trying harder." "That's clear, but we think it might be time for something more." Mr. Leary slid a folder across the table. Inside was a printed document with a logo from the local university. Jalen stared at the page. "What's this?" "There's a program at Eastwood University," Mr. Leary explained. "It's designed for students who show advanced ability in math and science. You'd take weekend classes, online assignments, and even attend a few summer workshops with professors." Jalen blinked. "Is it a scholarship?" "Sort of," Mr. Leary said. "It's not a full ride yet, but it's the beginning. These programs lead into larger opportunities, college credits, internships, and the best part is, we already spoke to your mom." Jalen looked up quickly. "You did?" "She was proud," the principal said. "Surprised, but proud. She gave us the green light to move forward if you're interested." Jalen sat there for a long moment, processing everything. A few months ago, he was solving worksheets in the back of class like everyone else. Now, he was being offered a chance to learn at a college level. "I'll do it," he said. And just like that, things moved forward. The next weekend, Jalen attended his first workshop. It was held in a modern building with glass walls and long white tables. He sat next to students too, sometimes 3 years older than him. At first, he barely spoke, but when the instructor presented a multi-step calculus problem, Jalen quietly raised his hand. Then he solved it. All of it. Step by step. Just like in his classroom weeks ago. By the end of the session, even the older students were asking him how he figured things out so quickly. Jalen didn't brag. He never made a big deal about it. He just smiled and said, "It just makes sense to me." Week after week, he kept returning. At school, his classmates began asking him for help, not just in math, but in science too. He became the go-to for anyone struggling before a quiz. But what stood out the most wasn't his intelligence. It was how he carried himself. He never made anyone feel small. He never rolled his eyes when someone didn't get something. He explained things like he'd been teaching for years, simple, clear, patient. One afternoon, a classmate named Tyrell approached him in the library. "Yo," Tyrell said, pulling up a chair. "I heard you solved some crazy problem at that college thing. They really let middle schoolers in there?" Jalen nodded. "Man," Tyrell said, shaking his head. "That's wild. You ever think of teaching? Like actually being a teacher?" Jalen shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe one day." "Bro, you'd be better than half the subs we've had." They both laughed, but the comment stuck in Jalen's mind. A few days later, Mr. Darnell noticed something. He had left the room briefly during a small group assignment, and when he returned, Jalen was standing at the front of the class, not showing off, but helping a group solve a problem they couldn't figure out. He wasn't acting like he was in charge. He was just walking through the steps, answering their questions. Mr. Darnell didn't interrupt. He just watched, and when class ended, he pulled Jalen aside. "You ever want to be a tutor?" he asked. Jalen raised an eyebrow. "Like during school? Maybe after. Maybe at lunch. We can work something out. Other students would really benefit." Jalen thought about it, then nodded. "Yeah, I could do that." Soon, a few tutoring sessions turned into a regular thing. Every Tuesday and Thursday, students gathered in the library to work through assignments, ask questions, and get help. Jalen never missed a session. He stayed until the last person packed up, even when it meant missing the bus home and walking instead. Word spread fast. Parents started calling the school, asking about the student who was tutoring their kids. Some wanted to meet him. Others asked how their own children could get involved. One afternoon, the school counselor, Ms. Parker, dropped by a session. She stood by the door and watched Jalen explaining a geometry concept to 3 seventh graders. He was focused, gentle in tone, clear in instruction. Afterward, she pulled him aside. "Jalen," she said, "I think it's time we talk about the next step." He paused. "What do you mean?" "There's a STEM camp in Chicago this summer. You'll need a recommendation, and I think we can get you one. It's selective, but it opens even more doors. You'll meet students from other states, some from overseas, all of them driven, just like you." Jalen stared at her. "Chicago?" She nodded. "We'll help with travel, and the program has scholarships. You'll be gone for 6 weeks, living on campus. You take classes, attend labs, do group projects. It's not just school. It's a big opportunity." Jalen felt his pulse rise. 6 weeks away from home. A different city, new people. He had never even left the state. "I've never been on a plane," he admitted. "There's a first time for everything," she smiled. He didn't answer right away, but later that night, sitting at the kitchen table, he told his mom about it. She paused while chopping vegetables and looked at him carefully. "Do you want to go?" "I think so." She nodded slowly. "Then we'll make it work." The next week, Jalen filled out the application. Teachers wrote letters. Mr. Darnell personally called the program's coordinator. A month later, the acceptance letter arrived. And that's when everything changed again. When Jalen boarded the plane to Chicago, he carried a backpack and a worn notebook full of his math work. He sat by the window, nervous but excited. He didn't know what to expect. All he knew was that something big was starting. At camp, he met students who had won national competitions, others who built robots, some who had already started coding apps or building machines. At first, Jalen felt out of place. But that feeling didn't last long, because on the 3rd day of camp, during a group project, someone suggested they split up the work, and one of the students handed Jalen the most difficult part of the problem. "Think you can handle this?" the boy asked, almost testing him. Jalen just smiled. "I got it." And he did. Again. The more time Jalen spent at the summer camp in Chicago, the more he realized how different it was from anything he had ever experienced. Every day was filled with challenges, group discussions, surprise quizzes, coding labs, even real-world problem simulations. At first, he felt a step behind. Some of the kids had private tutors back home. Some came from prep schools with advanced courses he had never heard of. But something in him refused to shrink. Jalen started waking up earlier than the others. While some were still asleep, he sat at a quiet table in the corner of the dorm's common area, reviewing notes and solving extra problems. He asked questions when he didn't understand something and never pretended to know it all. Slowly, the gap between him and the others began to shrink. One of the professors at the camp, Dr. Ingram, noticed him early on. She saw how Jalen worked, how he didn't push for attention, but always delivered when it mattered. One afternoon, she called him over after class. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Jalen nodded. "Why do you push so hard?" He paused. "Because nobody thought I would." She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Keep going." By the end of the 2nd week, Jalen had become a quiet force at the camp. He wasn't loud or flashy, but when it came to solving problems or leading group discussions, people started looking to him. During a big project presentation, Jalen stepped up in front of nearly 100 students, teachers, and visiting parents. His group had been working on a city planning model using math, science, and budget forecasting. While other groups spoke with polished, rehearsed lines, Jalen spoke simply, clearly, and confidently. He broke down how they solved traffic flow issues using equations, explained the math behind their designs, and answered every question the judges threw at them. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then applause filled the space. Later that day, one of the judges, an engineer from a major firm, approached him. "You handled that better than most adults I've seen," he said. "You have something real." That moment stayed with Jalen. When the camp ended, every student received a report card summarizing their performance, along with handwritten notes from instructors. Jalen's folder had one extra paper inside. It was a formal recommendation letter, one that could be used when applying for scholarships, internships, or even early college admissions. But the line that stood out most was written in pen at the bottom. It read, "Jalen, you don't just solve problems. You bring calm, you bring focus, and you raise everyone around you. Never stop." The flight home felt different. Jalen stared out the window, thinking about how much had changed in just 6 weeks. Before the camp, he was just starting to believe in his potential. Now he carried proof, not just in a folder, but in the way he saw himself. When he got back to school, the energy around him was different. His teachers were already updated. The counselor had told the staff about how he represented the school. Even students from other grades started recognizing him. One 8th grader stopped him in the hallway. "You're the one who went to Chicago, right?" Jalen nodded. "Can I show you something I'm working on? I need help." That became the new normal. People weren't just noticing Jalen, they were reaching out to him. But with all the praise came something else, too. Some students started acting distant. A few made sarcastic comments under their breath in the cafeteria. "Guess you're too smart for us now. You going to solve lunch next?" He heard it. He didn't say anything, but it stayed with him. One day after school, while walking home, his mom noticed something was off. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah." She waited. Jalen stayed quiet. "You don't have to talk," she said. "But just remember, some people only whisper when they feel small around someone who doesn't make themselves smaller." That line stuck with him. Instead of shrinking, Jalen leaned into helping others more. He didn't stop the tutoring sessions. He expanded them. He added Saturdays at the public library, posted flyers, and even got a few teachers to volunteer their time. More students showed up each week. Some just came to watch. Some came to challenge him. Others came to finally pass the class they had failed before. Mr. Darnell sat in on a session one afternoon and said quietly, "I didn't expect this when I gave you that problem back in September." Jalen smiled. "Me neither." But even as things were going well, something unexpected happened. One day, Mr. Leary, the principal, called Jalen into his office. "Have a seat," he said. "We've got an invitation for you." Jalen raised an eyebrow. "There's a state academic conference coming up. High schools send their best math students. It's mostly juniors and seniors. But we've been asked if we want to nominate someone early. Just one student from our district." Jalen looked at him. "We want to nominate you." Jalen blinked. "But I'm in 8th grade." "They know," Mr. Leary said. "But they've reviewed your camp work, your test scores, and your teaching sessions. They think you're ready." The conference would be held in 3 months. It wasn't just a math competition. It was an environment filled with recruiters, scholarship scouts, and college advisors. Jalen said yes. This time, the school helped him prepare. His math teacher worked with him after hours. Dr. Ingram from camp offered video calls to go over complex topics. Even former students who had attended the conference sent him messages with advice. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing what he could do. When the day came, Jalen wore a plain button-up shirt, jeans, and sneakers. He stood out, not because of what he wore, but because he didn't try to be anything but himself. At the conference, there were whiteboards in every room. When a complex problem popped up during a mock trial, one of the moderators called for volunteers to solve it publicly. Several students hesitated. A few stepped forward. Then Jalen raised his hand. He walked up, took the marker, and faced the board. No nerves, no rush. He read the problem, broke it down, and began writing. Step by step, he went through each stage. Some of the students started whispering as he moved. One professor leaned forward. A judge stood up. When he reached the final answer, Jalen stepped back and turned to face the room. No one spoke. Then the judge said, "That was correct." The room clapped. But it wasn't just about getting the right answer. It was the way he did it. Clear, simple, focused. After the session, several professors came up to him. One handed him a card. "If you ever want to work in data science, call us. We'd love to have you in our summer institute." Another shook his hand. "Your clarity is rare. Stay curious." Jalen nodded and thanked them. That night, as he rode back with his school chaperones, Mr. Leary looked at him and said, "You just made a name for yourself out there." Jalen didn't smile. He just said, "There's still more to do." After the conference, Jalen returned home with more than just a new experience. He brought back a different kind of confidence. Not loud, not showy, just steady. People back at school had heard about the event. The local paper even ran a small article with his photo and a headline that said, "Eighth grader solves what seniors couldn't." At first, it felt a little overwhelming. Some classmates gave him high fives. Some gave him distance. A few teachers started watching him more closely in class. Mr. Darnell, the same teacher who once wrote that problem on the board as a joke, asked him to stay after class one day. "I need help with something," he said. Jalen looked surprised. "Help?" Mr. Darnell smiled. "Not with math? With something bigger?" He explained that the school district wanted to start a student peer mentoring program, and they needed someone to help design it. Not just participate, but build it from the ground up. He handed Jalen a folder with some outlines. "Can you look through this? Maybe give it your style?" Jalen took it home and started reading. It wasn't just about math tutoring. It included conflict resolution, helping students with time management, building confidence in academics, and creating a space where students could support each other without fear. He worked on it every night for 2 weeks. By the time he submitted his version, the program looked completely different. Simpler, more practical, and focused on students helping students in real ways. The school board approved it. They even renamed it after Jalen's suggestion, Level Up. By spring, Level Up was running at full speed. Each day after school, different students paired up with mentors. Some talked about homework, some talked about pressure, some just needed someone to sit with. Jalen didn't just run the program. He stayed involved. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he still met with students struggling with math. But now, other students joined as mentors too. It became a movement. Not one led by adults, but built by the kids who were in it together. One afternoon, while walking through the hallway, Jalen passed a group of younger students crowded around a bulletin board. They were looking at a new flyer. "Math team tryouts, all grades welcome." Jalen stopped. He hadn't heard about it. He asked the math teacher, Ms. Raymond. "We created it last week," she said. "We want to take a team to the state level this year. We need someone to help run practice sessions. Thought of you." Jalen nodded. "I'm in." The first practice session brought in more students than expected. Over 20 showed up. Some were confident, some just curious. A few sat in the back and stayed quiet. Jalen started with a few problems on the whiteboard, some simple, some tougher. He told everyone, "This isn't about being perfect, it's about how you think." Then he handed out a challenge problem. One of the students raised a hand. "This one's too hard." Jalen walked over, smiled, and said, "It looked hard to me too at first." He sat beside them, explained the first part, and left space for the student to try the rest. That became the routine. Every practice, more students started showing up. Not because they were forced, but because they wanted to learn. Then something unexpected happened. The school announced that for the first time, they had qualified to send a full team to the regional math competition, but they only had funding to send 5 students. Jalen was automatically given a spot. The teachers left the rest up to a vote. Students would decide who else went, based on how helpful, committed, and consistent they'd been. At the final practice before the decision, Jalen stood in front of the group. "I just want to say," he began, "whoever gets picked, it's not about being better. We're a team. No matter what." The room clapped. When the votes came in, the 4 other names chosen were all students Jalen had personally worked with during the sessions. One of them, Caleb, had failed math the year before, but had made one of the biggest improvements since joining Level Up. The regional competition took place in a neighboring city. The 5 of them rode together in a small district van, quiet at first, each of them staring out the window, nervous and thinking. Jalen broke the silence. "Remember when we couldn't solve that geometry problem 2 weeks ago?" Everyone looked up. Caleb nodded. "I still don't know how I got that one right." They all laughed. The tension faded. When they arrived, the competition center was buzzing. Teams from magnet schools and private academies filled the building. Some wore matching shirts. Others had custom notebooks and calculators that looked like they belonged in a lab. Jalen's team walked in wearing basic backpacks and school logo hoodies. They were underdogs in every sense of the word. But that didn't stop them. The first round was individual. Jalen breezed through it. The others gave it their best, but Caleb froze halfway through. He looked over at Jalen after the timer rang. "I messed up. I know it." Jalen put a hand on his shoulder. "It's not over." The second round was group-based. The problems were harder and required strategy and communication. Jalen quickly assigned roles. "You take the charts, you check logic, I'll do equations." They solved the first 3 problems with 1 minute to spare. The final round was the tiebreaker. Only the top 3 teams would advance. A buzzer sounded, and one final question appeared on the screen. It was complex, involving systems of equations and data interpretation. Jalen stood up without a word and walked to the board. He read the problem, broke it into parts, and started writing. Each line was met with silence. Every time he moved the marker, more students started watching. After 7 minutes, he circled the final answer, turned around, and waited. One of the judges nodded, another typed something on a tablet. Finally, a voice announced, "Correct." Their team placed second. That moment marked more than a win. It was validation, for the team, for the school, for every student who had ever felt like they didn't belong in the room. On the ride home, they didn't talk much. They were tired, but smiling. The next morning, the school welcomed them back with claps in the hallway. Even students who had never paid attention to math before were asking, "How'd you do it?" Jalen didn't give a big speech. He just said, "We didn't stop." After the regional competition, Things at school changed even more for Jalen, but not just for him. More students started signing up for the math team. The Level Up program grew fast. What started as a few students staying after school turned into a full schedule with weekly meetups, peer support circles, and even study groups on weekends. Jalen was proud of what they had built, but he never let it get to his head. He kept showing up, kept helping, and kept listening to others the same way he always had. One morning, Jalen was called to the front office. When he got there, the principal, Mr. Rowe, was waiting. "You've got a visitor," Mr. Rowe said. A woman stood beside him, smiling. She introduced herself as Ms. Kendall from the city's Department of Education. "I've heard a lot about you," she said. Jalen was quiet, unsure how to respond. "We've been tracking schools with rising student involvement in academic support programs," she explained. "Your school has had the highest increase in student-led tutoring in the whole district." Jalen nodded slowly. "We want to feature your program in the city's academic showcase next month." Jalen looked surprised. "Wait, like present it?" "Yes," Ms. Kendall smiled. "You'd present how you started it, how it works, and what kind of results you've seen." Jalen agreed, but deep down, he felt nervous. He had never spoken in front of people that way before. He was used to math problems and helping classmates, not standing on stage with lights and microphones. Still, he didn't want to turn it down. So for the next few weeks, he prepared. He stayed late at school writing his speech, practiced with teachers, ran through it again and again with the other students in Level Up. Finally, the day of the showcase arrived. It was held in a large auditorium downtown, filled with teachers, principals, school officials, and even reporters. Jalen sat in the front row, holding a flash drive with his slides and a page of notes in his lap. He looked around. Other presenters wore suits and ties. He was wearing a clean hoodie and sneakers. When his name was called, he walked to the stage slowly, took a deep breath, and faced the crowd. He didn't read from his notes. He just started talking. "I'm not the smartest person in the room," he said. "But I know what it feels like to be counted out before you even try." He spoke about the moment Mr. Darnell gave him that problem on the board. He spoke about the silence in the classroom. He spoke about how that one moment changed the way he saw himself. Then he talked about Level Up, not with fancy terms or big numbers, just real stories, like Caleb, who went from failing math to tutoring younger students, or Selena, who started coming to the sessions just to pass, but ended up staying because she wanted to help others. When he finished, the room was quiet. Then it burst into applause. Ms. Kendall walked up after and handed him a certificate. Jalen smiled but didn't say much. He just walked back to his seat and sat down, heart still racing. After the event, a local education podcast invited him to speak. A news website wrote a short article titled, "From Challenge to Change: How a Student Inspired a School." Jalen stayed grounded through all of it, but not everyone around him did. Some students started treating him like he was different. One day in the cafeteria, a student named Corey said, loud enough for others to hear, "Oh, look, it's the genius! Bet he doesn't even eat regular food like the rest of us." A few people laughed. Jalen looked at him calmly. "I eat just like you," he said. "Want to sit here?" Corey hesitated. Then he sat. They didn't talk much at first, but over the next few days, they kept crossing paths. Eventually, Corey showed up to one of the Level Up sessions, said he needed help with geometry. Turned out, he didn't need much help. He was just afraid to ask questions in class. Jalen told him, You don't need to be loud to be good at something. You just have to show up. Corey came back every week after that. Word started spreading again, but this time, not about Jalen himself, about how different the whole school felt. Teachers were reporting fewer late assignments. Students were solving problems together in the hallways before class. One of the guidance counselors said, "This is what school's supposed to be." At the end of the year, Mr. Darnell called Jalen to his classroom. He pulled out a folder and placed it on his desk. "I found this the other day," he said, "from the first month of school." Jalen opened it. Inside was a copy of the problem Mr. Darnell had written on the board all those months ago. He smiled. "You kept it?" Jalen asked. "Yeah," Mr. Darnell replied. "I didn't know what it would become, but I figured one day you might want to look back." Jalen looked at the paper. It had a few smudges, the marker lines slightly faded, but the solution was still there. His solution. "Thanks," he said, folding the page carefully. Mr. Darnell cleared his throat. "There's something else." He reached into a drawer and handed Jalen a sealed envelope. "What's this?" Jalen asked. "A letter from the State Education Board." Jalen opened it and read the first line. "We are pleased to offer you." He stopped and looked up. Mr. Darnell smiled. "A scholarship, full ride, summer program for gifted math students, State University campus, advanced placement." Jalen didn't say a word. He just nodded. He knew what it meant. Not just the scholarship, but the message behind it. That he belonged there. That he earned it. That the kid who once stood in front of a class, unsure and quiet, was now building paths not just for himself, but for others too. That night, at home, he placed the old problem sheet on his wall next to the letter. 2 pieces of paper, one that started it all, and one that proved how far it had gone. A week after getting the scholarship letter, Jalen stood outside the school library holding a clipboard. He was signing students up for a new project, one he had been thinking about for a long time. It wasn't about solving harder math problems. It was about giving others the same kind of space he had found. He called it Open Solve. It was a peer-led problem-solving hour where students brought in anything they were struggling with. Math, science, writing, even just staying organized. No grades, no pressure, just help. The idea was simple. If someone needed help, someone else would try to help them. If nobody knew the answer, they would figure it out together. At first, only 5 people signed up, but Jalen didn't care. He showed up anyway, holding a dry erase marker and waiting by the board. By the end of the week, those 5 turned into 15, then 25, then more. Even students who used to sit quietly in the back of class started showing up. One student, Tanya, said, "I always thought I wasn't smart enough to ask questions, but here, I don't feel judged." Another student, Leo, said, "This place makes it feel okay to not get something the first time." Jalen kept leading the sessions calmly, just like he had when it was only 2 people in a corner of the hallway. But with all the attention, some people started questioning his success. One teacher, Mr. Wren, said in a staff meeting, "This is great, but are we sure it's really student-driven?" It's hard to believe a teenager is doing all this without someone pulling strings. Mr. Darnell heard that comment. He didn't say much at the time. But later, he walked into one of the Open Solve sessions. He watched Jalen break down a complicated problem to a group of students using simple, easy-to-understand steps. He watched how students leaned in, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Then he stepped back out. He didn't need to say anything. The proof was right there. That same week, something else happened. A letter arrived from the city council. It invited Jalen to speak at the Youth Innovation Forum. The letter said, "Your efforts have impacted not just your school, but the broader community. We would like to honor your work and give you a platform to share your journey." It wasn't just another talk. This one would be broadcast live on local TV. Jalen accepted. He didn't dress up. He wore the same clean hoodie, jeans, and the sneakers his mom had saved up for as a gift after the math competition. When he stepped on stage, he paused before speaking. Then he said, "I never planned on changing anything. I just wanted a chance. And when I got one, I realized other people deserved a chance too." He told them how everything started with one problem on a whiteboard. He told them how he used to stay quiet because he thought being quiet made him invisible. Then he said, "Turns out, being quiet doesn't mean you have nothing to say. Sometimes it just means you're still figuring out how to say it." The audience clapped. But it wasn't just polite clapping. It was the kind of clapping people do when they feel something in their chest. Back at school, the Open Solve program became part of the official tutoring schedule. More teachers started recommending it to students. Even the school counselor began using it as a place to connect students who were falling behind. Jalen didn't want to be seen as someone above anyone else, so he kept doing the same thing, showing up, helping out, and learning with everyone. One afternoon, Mr. Darnell called him into his classroom again. "I know I've said this before," he began, "but you've really changed this school." Jalen gave a small smile. "I didn't mean to." Mr. Darnell chuckled. "I know. That's what makes it matter more." Then Mr. Darnell reached into his drawer and pulled out another envelope. "University sent this," he said. Jalen opened it and saw something unexpected. A personal letter from the dean of the summer program. It read, "We've reviewed your work, your background, and your school involvement. Your problem-solving ability is impressive, but your leadership is something we don't see often. We'd like to extend an invitation to join the university's mentorship team for incoming students. You would be our youngest ever student mentor." Jalen looked up. "They want me to help college students?" "First-year students," Mr. Darnell nodded. "They want you to support them as they adjust to college-level math." Jalen sat quietly. It wasn't that he didn't believe it. It was that everything that started from a single moment had now grown into something even he didn't expect. Helping others solve problems had become a part of who he was. Before he left the room, Mr. Darnell said, "You remember what I told you months ago? About how we don't always know who's in front of us?" Jalen nodded. "Well," Mr. Darnell continued, "I've known a lot of students, a lot of smart ones, but very few had the ability to make others believe in themselves. You have that." Jalen didn't respond. He just nodded and walked out, quietly taking it all in. That night, Jalen sat at his desk at home, looking at the two sheets still pinned to his wall, the first problem and the scholarship letter. He pulled out the new one, the university mentorship letter, and added it to the wall. Then he looked at the space next to it. He wasn't sure what would go there next. Jalen's phone buzzed late one evening, just a week after the Youth Innovation Forum. He was in his room, writing some notes for his next tutoring session when he glanced down. It was a message from Arjun, one of the students he'd met during the summer program. "You're not going to believe this," Arjun typed. "I got an internship at the same university. They said they were impressed by my project. Something about community outreach." Jalen smiled. He had helped Arjun refine his idea for the project during their time at the summer program, a sustainable tech solution designed to help local schools save on energy costs. Arjun's project had turned into something big, just like his own efforts had. Arjun's success wasn't surprising to Jalen. He had seen that same drive in his peer. But still, Jalen couldn't help but feel proud. He quickly typed back, "I knew you could do it. I'm happy for you." But there was something else running through his mind, too. Jalen had spent so much time focusing on helping others, he'd almost forgotten about his own next step: college. The next chapter of his life was approaching fast, and it was time to figure out what he wanted to do with all the opportunities coming his way. The thought lingered in his mind for days, even as he ran through his own sessions and helped more and more students. Then, one afternoon, he received another message, this time from Mr. Darnell. It read, "Jalen, I want to talk about something important. Call me when you have a chance." Jalen was nervous. He wasn't sure if it was good news or bad news, but he trusted Mr. Darnell, so he immediately dialed the number. "Jalen," Mr. Darnell answered, "I've been thinking a lot about everything you've done this year, about the mentoring and how you've helped change this school. I have a suggestion, and I think it might be the right next step for you." Jalen listened closely, unsure of where this conversation was heading. "I want to nominate you for a spot in the university's full-ride scholarship program. They're looking for students who have demonstrated leadership outside of just academics. You've more than proven that." Jalen's heart skipped a beat. A full-ride scholarship. "But I thought I already had a scholarship," Jalen said. "The one from the summer program?" "You do," Mr. Darnell replied. "But this one would cover all your tuition and living expenses for the next 4 years. Plus, it comes with a leadership training component." Jalen paused, stunned by the possibility. "Mr. Darnell, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything yet," Mr. Darnell continued. "But I want you to think about it. This is a chance to not only go to college, but also to really build the foundation for something bigger. You've already shown you have the skills to mentor and teach. This could help you take it to the next level." Jalen didn't know what to think. It felt like everything he had been working toward was suddenly falling into place. But he also knew it was a huge decision. "I'll think about it," Jalen finally said, his voice low. "Thank you for believing in me, Mr. Darnell." "You earned it, Jalen," Mr. Darnell said before hanging up. For the next few days, Jalen couldn't stop thinking about the scholarship. He sat with the idea at the kitchen table, scribbling down notes and weighing his options. The pressure was on, but so was the excitement. That night, he talked to his mom. He told her about the scholarship and the leadership opportunity that came with it. She smiled at him and said, "You've worked so hard for everything you have, Jalen. You've built something important. Whatever you choose, just know I'm proud of you." It was exactly what he needed to hear, that reminder of the bigger picture. The next morning, Jalen made his decision. He called Mr. Darnell and told him he was in. Days passed in a blur as the scholarship process moved forward. Jalen had to submit essays and provide letters of recommendation. The application was thorough, but he had already experienced the process of reflection and growth over the past year. It was a culmination of everything he'd learned, from solving problems on the whiteboard to leading students who needed someone to believe in them. The hardest part wasn't the application itself, it was waiting. Then came the phone call. Jalen was at his desk, organizing a new batch of math problems for an open solve session when the number from the university flashed on his screen. His hands shook as he answered. "Hello?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Jalen, this is Sarah from the University of Leadership and Innovation. I'm calling to inform you that you've been selected for the full ride scholarship. Congratulations." Jalen couldn't speak. He could only listen as Sarah went over the details of the scholarship and what it meant for him. All he could think about was his journey, from that first joke in class, to tutoring sessions in the community center, to now being awarded a full-ride scholarship to a prestigious university. When he finally hung up, the reality of it all hit him. This wasn't just about math or leadership anymore. It was about something deeper. How the smallest actions, like a single moment on a whiteboard, could lead to a ripple effect that changed everything. As he stood up from his desk, he looked out the window. He thought about the first time he solved a problem on the board and the doubt he'd felt in that moment. Now there was no more doubt. He was ready for whatever came next. Jalen felt an overwhelming sense of calm wash over him as he sat back down in his room. The scholarship was real. He had done it. But there was still more ahead of him, and the reality of that began to settle in. This wasn't just about earning the scholarship. It was about the future, about stepping into a role where he could influence even more lives than he had before. He immediately pulled out his notebook and began drafting an email to Mr. Darnell, thanking him for everything. It felt like a small gesture compared to the impact Mr. Darnell had had on him, but Jalen knew it would mean a lot. As he typed, his phone buzzed again, snapping him out of his thoughts. This time, it was a text from his old friend, Terrence. "Hey man, I heard the news. Scholarship? That's huge. Let's hang out soon and celebrate. You've earned it." Jalen smiled and quickly replied, "Thanks, man. I'd love that. Let's plan something this weekend." But as he put his phone down and returned to his email, a lingering thought crossed his mind. A question that had been nagging him for weeks. What was the next step? He'd earned the scholarship, but what would he study? What path would he take in college, and how could he continue to make an impact? He had always been passionate about numbers, about breaking them down and using them to solve problems. But now, it wasn't just math he was interested in. It was how he could use math, leadership, and his voice to help others in a broader sense. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. His calling wasn't just about becoming a mathematician. It was about leading initiatives that could inspire future generations, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds, to believe in their potential. But it wasn't just about the academics. Jalen knew he wanted to focus on real-world problems, on finding ways to use technology, innovation, and education to bring change to communities like his. The challenge now was how to build that into his future. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparations. Jalen spent hours filling out paperwork, sorting out his living arrangements, and attending meetings about the scholarship program. He also kept in touch with his old friends from the summer program, discussing their plans and what their next steps would be. It felt like the beginning of something monumental, and Jalen was determined to make the most of it. But even as he dove into these preparations, there were moments of doubt that crept in, especially when he thought about his past and the challenges he'd faced. There were still people who doubted him, who saw his potential but didn't always believe in him, who saw him as just another kid from the wrong side of town. But Jalen knew he was no longer that person. He had earned this spot. He had worked for it, and now he was going to prove everyone wrong. One evening, he was sitting with his mom in the kitchen, talking about his future plans. She had been quiet for a while, letting him do most of the talking. But then, she spoke up. "You've come a long way, Jalen," she said softly. "I know it hasn't been easy. I know there were times when you doubted yourself, when you thought you weren't good enough. But I always believed in you. And now, look at you. You've got a future ahead of you that's going to change everything. You've always had the strength inside you. You just had to find it. Her words hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't just about proving others wrong. It was about proving to himself that he was capable of more than he had ever imagined. Later that week, he had his first official meeting with the university's scholarship coordinator, a woman named Sarah, who had called him to inform him of his acceptance. She was kind but professional, walking him through the details of the scholarship and what was expected of him. "So, Jalen," Sarah began as they sat across from each other in a brightly lit office. "We're all incredibly excited to have you join the program. We've seen the work you've done already, and I have no doubt you'll make an impact here. But I want to make sure you understand that this program is about leadership, not just academics. It's about using your voice, your talents, and your experiences to help others." Jalen nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had always been someone who preferred to let his work speak for itself. But now, he realized that being a leader meant speaking up, using his story to inspire others. "I understand," he said, feeling a sense of responsibility wash over him. "Good," Sarah said with a smile. "We'll be sending you all the details about the mentorship program soon. You'll be paired with a faculty mentor who will help you navigate the transition into college life. In the meantime, take some time to really think about what you want to focus on during your time here. We're looking for students who have a passion for social change, whether it's through technology, community outreach, or education." Jalen's mind started racing as he thought about all the possibilities. Technology, community outreach, education. All of these things had been part of his journey so far, but now it was time to take them to the next level. This was his chance to do something bigger than he had ever dreamed. That night, as he lay in bed, he reflected on everything that had led him to this point. From the challenge in the classroom, to the late-night tutoring sessions, to his work with the Youth Innovation Forum. Everything had brought him here. And now, it was time to start thinking about what came next. He wasn't just going to go to college. He was going to use his time there to build something that could change the world. He was going to use his platform to lift others up, just like Mr. Darnell had lifted him. He had always been a student of numbers, but now he would become a student of life. The first day of college arrived faster than Jalen had anticipated. The excitement was palpable as he walked across the campus, taking in the bustling environment of students, professors, and staff members. Everything felt different from the small town he grew up in. The campus was alive with energy, and the future he had worked so hard for was now unfolding right in front of him. As Jalen made his way to his first class, he felt a mix of nerves and excitement. He had worked so hard to get here. But now the real challenge began. The scholarship had opened doors for him, but it was up to him to walk through them and make the most of every opportunity that came his way. His first class was an advanced calculus course. Jalen had already tackled complex math problems in high school, but he had heard that college-level math could be even more intense. As he sat down at his desk, he noticed that the room was filled with students who seemed to be just as eager to learn as he was. He felt a sense of camaraderie with them, a shared ambition to succeed, to push the boundaries of what they were capable of. The professor, Dr. Leonard, walked into the room and greeted the class. He was an older man, with graying hair and a kind smile that put everyone at ease. He began with a brief introduction about the course and what they would be covering throughout the semester. "Calculus isn't just about solving equations," Dr. Leonard said, looking around the room. "It's about understanding how the world works, The math we're about to dive into can explain everything from the motion of planets to the growth of populations. It's the language of the universe, and once you learn how to speak it, there's no limit to what you can understand. Jalen felt his pulse quicken. This was exactly what he had been searching for. Math that wasn't just about solving problems on paper, but about understanding the deeper truths that governed the world around him. As the class progressed, Dr. Leonard began writing equations on the board, demonstrating complex concepts and leading the students through various problem-solving techniques. Jalen was fully engaged, his mind racing with excitement as he followed along. He had always loved math, but now it felt like he was on the verge of unlocking a whole new level of understanding. The students around him seemed to be struggling with some of the more difficult problems. They were whispering to each other, asking questions, and trying to make sense of the equations. Jalen could sense the tension in the room. He knew that if he could solve the problems they were struggling with, he could help break through that tension, just like Mr. Darnell had done for him back in high school. Jalen raised his hand, and Dr. Leonard nodded in his direction. "Jalen?" he asked. Jalen stood up, feeling the eyes of his classmates on him. He walked up to the board, ready to tackle the problems in front of him. He could sense the skepticism in the room. No one knew what to expect. But he wasn't about to back down. He had worked for this moment. He had proven to himself that he belonged here. With confidence, Jalen began to solve the problems on the board. He didn't just write the answers. He explained each step of his process, breaking down the equations and showing his classmates how to approach the problems from different angles. His voice was steady, and his hand moved smoothly as he wrote the solutions. The room fell silent as everyone watched him work. By the time he finished, the entire class was staring at him in disbelief. Jalen had not only solved the problems, they now understood how to approach similar problems themselves. The tension had lifted, replaced by a sense of awe. Dr. Leonard, who had been quietly observing, gave a small nod of approval. "That was impressive, Jalen," he said, his voice carrying a note of admiration. "You've got a real talent for this." The students around him began to clap, some of them nodding in approval. Jalen felt a rush of pride. This was what he had come here for, to make a difference, to show his peers that they were all capable of more than they realized. But as the class ended, Jalen's thoughts turned back to the scholarship, to everything that had led him to this point. He couldn't help but feel the weight of the opportunity he had been given. It wasn't just about excelling in math. It was about using this knowledge to make a real impact on the world. He had seen the power of education, of mentors like Mr. Darnell who believed in him, and now he was determined to pass that belief on to others. As he walked out of the classroom, Jalen's phone buzzed. It was a message from his mentor, Sarah, the scholarship coordinator. "Hey Jalen," the message began. "I heard about your first class. You did great. I want to touch base with you about your upcoming mentor meeting. Let me know when you have time to chat." Jalen smiled. The support was already starting to pour in, and he knew that this was just the beginning. College wasn't going to be easy, but he was ready for whatever came next. That evening, he sat down at his desk, reflecting on everything that had happened so far. It was all coming together. He had the opportunity to build something meaningful, something that could last beyond his time in college. The challenges would be tough, but he had already proven to himself that he could overcome anything that came his way. Weeks turned into months, and Jalen was thriving. He wasn't just keeping up. He was helping others keep up too. He spent extra hours tutoring classmates, leading study groups, and building a quiet reputation as someone who didn't just know the answer, but could teach it. One afternoon after class, Dr. Leonard stopped Jalen in the hallway. "You ever think about teaching?" he asked casually. Jalen shrugged, smiling. "Honestly, I used to think it wasn't for me, but now I'm starting to see how much it can matter." Dr. Leonard nodded. "Well, whatever you do, just don't waste the gift. The world needs minds like yours." Later that evening, Jalen sat alone in the student center, looking out the window as the sun dipped behind the buildings. He thought about everything. The day Mr. Darnell had called him up to the board, the laughter, the silence that followed, and the applause that had changed everything. That moment had pushed him. It had lit a fire that never went out. He had no idea where life would take him next. Grad school, research, maybe teaching, maybe all three. But whatever came, he knew one thing for sure. He didn't need to prove himself to anyone anymore. Not because he was better, but because he believed in what he had to offer. Jalen pulled out his notebook and jotted down an idea for a tutoring program he wanted to start for high school students in low-income areas, something he wished he'd had earlier. It wasn't about being a genius or a star. It was about giving someone that moment, the one that makes them sit up, pay attention, and finally believe in themselves. The same moment that had changed his life. And just like that, he closed the notebook, packed up his bag, and walked out of the building, quiet, confident, and ready for whatever came next. Because sometimes, all it takes is one problem on the board to solve everything else that follows.